Hey, here we go. Tuscany Vineyard, one of my favorites. I love the red flowers in the front. They're so much fun. So here's what it looks like, and there is a printable trace, or you can freehand it and have a little bit of fun. There's always that eraser. Here I just have a little sample of the colors that I used. So these colors are all primary with one little mix of burnt sienna. Pretty simple palette. So this is an intermediate to advanced level painting. I'm just using a couple of round brushes and a very small wash brush, which is a square shape. This is a plastic palette. It's a savable palette with a lid. Again, this is just a dual primary palette, and I've got some extra greens that are pre-mixed, as well as like a reddish brown called burnt sienna. I've got some paints pre-mixed over on the lid. That's what I use for my mixing palette. So let's get started. I have a jug of water and I have 3 brushes. I did forget that I did use 2 angle brushes here. The taller one is a rigger, or it's a detail brush, and there's your larger wash brush. I'll often use that in the sky just to kind of get things covered up. So that's the one we'll start with. Let's take a nice deep breath and start moving the paint over onto our mixing palette. I'll grab some white, and I generally will have a couple different piles of white. You know that one of them is going to get all gooked up with muddy and mixed up colors, so you'll see several piles of white kind of evolve over the course of this painting. For now, I'm using a little bit of the purple mix and the blue mix. So that's the blue mix I first put on there is white with something that would be like Winsor blue or phthalo blue. And we'll start with the darkest up at the top, just a little bit. There's actually not much on my brush. I just want a little bit of color to start out with before I go into the next. Now this is a wet on wet technique, and that means one color is still wet with paint, not water, when I lay down the next color, and then I bring those colors together while all of the paints are still wet on wet. If you work slow, this is going to be a bit of a challenge because when that top blue part dries and you're still working on getting that white down at the horizon, then you're going to get this harsh line, and then you're going to have to work really hard trying to fix that. So just get the paint on, use enough paint, and don't worry about it at this point. You can layer over anything. All right, I did forget to mention that I switched to a fresh, clean, dry brush when I picked up that white. Nice. Now this is what I call feathering. So it's a very, very light pressure. I don't have hardly any paint on my brush. And notice that I'm tilting the brush kind of to the side. If you go in with the tip of the brush, even if it's a light pressure, you're going to get what I call dings, those little divots that the brush makes, especially when you're trying to blend it and make it smooth. So use the side of the brush and not much paint on the brush towards the end blending parts. Nice. Don't forget to breathe. It's always nice when you're trying to have some fun, is breathing. So I've got my green mix. So that is the yellow and the cool blue. Get through a little bit of white in there so that I could lighten it up just a little bit. Now this is for the distant hills, just below the horizon line. So when you mix the white or the sky color into your distant elements, whether it be trees or hills or even buildings, if you put the sky color just a little bit to influence that color, that will help your eye read it as further in the distance. And the more you add of that color to your base color, the further away your eye will read it. That's how you get depth. Beautiful. Yet another fresh brush. Now these are not wet brushes. They haven't been dipped in water. They're better for blending and they don't dilute the color at all. So back over to that bright yellow. This would be a cool yellow. That's just a little bit of the cool red. Again, this is a dual primary palette. So if you've seen the video, the red to the left, that's the warm red. It has a little bit more yellow in the base. And the one on the right that I used has a little bit more blue in the base. They're both still red, but the influence of yellow or blue determines its temperature. Nice. So what I'm doing here is creating a color value scale. That's what I call it. So I've got the dark, the medium to the lightest colors, as far as the orange to the yellow to the kind of a cream color is going to be on my painting. I've got enough paint on there to create what I'm painting. So that's going to be the important part when I do the villa, when I paint the villa and the vineyard in the back. I don't need much, but I do want to make sure I have enough so I don't have to keep remixing it. So I'm getting a nice muted texture into the vineyard in the back. And notice I'm going furthest away till closest, so the sky is the furthest away, then the hills, then the distant rows in the vineyard, and I'll keep moving forward. It will bounce around in the foreground a little bit at some point, but generally speaking, if you get the background in, then it helps you determine the temperature as well as the contrasting values, the lights and the darks in the middle and foreground, to help achieve the best depth. You may or may not notice that I'm applying the vineyard across the lines, so I'm following the lines as I apply the paint. So I've got the green now. Notice I went into it with a little bit of water. So I'm just diluting the green just a little bit and putting it in the already wet, still wet paint. So that follows the same philosophy that there's green in there, but I still want it to look farther away. I don't want it to be as bright or as dark as it will be in the foreground. It's going to look different. Adding a little bit of water creates a wash, and that helps it. Kind of pushes it back some. Now here I get just a little bit crazy. I'm just taking willy-nilly colors and filling it in. Basically what you can do in these areas is just get some color on. You're gonna go over that with another thin layer. There's not much there. Those are just space holders. Areas that are holding space for what you want your viewer to really focus on, which is the atmosphere around the villa itself and the vineyard in the distance, without using too much detail all over your canvas so that the viewer does not know what you want them to look at. So we're just kind of blocking this in. I like to tell my students, if it looks like a 5-year-old did it, then you have successfully achieved a blocking in stage. So at any point, if you haven't already, please don't rush through this. Just hit pause, take your time, and enjoy yourself. Take a breath. Beautiful. Looks great. So, the next step, this is mostly blocked in. We're going to want to block as much as we can in before we dive into the details. The important part about blocking in is to get all those little white specks that you see coming through the canvas covered in and blocked in. And next we are going to mix the dark greens and the green value scale, as we did for this part of it, for the creepy green Italian trees, as they say in oh gosh, what was that movie? That Tuscany movie, Under the Tuscan Sun. I love that movie. Inspired this for me to paint many Tuscany scenes. So let's get started mixing those dark, rich greens. All right, so let's just flip the palette around. We've got a nice fresh space to start bringing in some colors and starting the next phase of our painting. So I'm going to bring some green over. This may or may not surprise you. We're going to bring some of that cool red over too. And notice that I'm using my paper towel. It's a dry paper towel. You can use a rag, whatever you're comfortable using, to every once in a while just wipe off the brush that's on your paint. That way you're not rinsing it out all the time and not having to dry it. It kind of saves time. So what I created was a dark purple. It's equal parts blue. So that's like the ultramarine blue. It has more red in the base than yellow in the base. You're going to want to make that dark purpley color and then take some of that and bring it over into the green. You've got a really nice dark rich green. And these are going to be what we call shade. So you're going to use these to shade any colors throughout your green parts of your canvas. So once again, I'm creating a value scale of greens. Got that nice rich dark color I just mixed, and then I took some yellow and pulled that out, and now I'm taking some white and pulled the middle part out. So each phase of that preparing the colors, I just call this the messy mix because I have so many different colors I can take from. Instead of just mixing 1 or 2 or 3 colors at a time, I just leave all the in-between colors and values in there. So yeah, I think we're ready to start this next part of the painting. So I believe we are ready to start the tree. So we'll start with that middle dark green, not the darkest, but the middle dark green. And we'll just get the colors rolling. So we're gonna add the different values in all at once. We're not gonna go through and make them all dark and then go back through and add the different values. We're going to get a base color, which is this medium dark green. I'm using an angle brush that allows me to have a tip that's a pointy tip towards the top, and I'm kind of smooshing in the bottom half of the brush so that I can push it in past the blank canvas and really fill all of the canvas as much as possible. You can avoid having to work so hard to fill the canvas if you'd like and take an extra step. And that would be adding a wash. You just take that same green color, add a little water to it, not much, just a little to dilute it, and go ahead and block in all of the trees. I'm choosing not to do that here, so I can show you it's possible to do it without blocking it in. I just wipe my brush off because I just noticed I missed some of the grass. Not to worry, just go in, fill it in. It's the benefit of having all your colors right there. So I use that same color, and I'm using the right side, so assuming that the light is coming from the right side or behind the villa. And so the right side of all the trees will add a little bit of the lighter colors in while the trees are still wet. Give you a sense of what tree is forward and what tree is back. Those are just a little bit of a shadow. I just picked up the darker green. Add a little shadow. It's going to go away from where the sun is coming from. So it comes in from the right, so the shadows move towards the left. Good. Well, sometimes that brush gets a little gooked up, so we rinse it out, dry it off really good. And sometimes I like to go in with a fresh brush again, so I'm not using a diluted brush. And here we go again. We'll start with a refresh of the palette. And now that you have the colors down, you see that in the middle you just need to add a little yellow. Then you can have more of that green. On the end, you would add a little bit of white. And we're just going to do the same thing that we did to those 3 trees on the left to each of the trees that are, there's 3 bunches of trees around the villa. Just take a nice deep breath and just enjoy painting trees. Remember, at any time you can pause the video and paint at your pace. I've painted some of these paint-along paintings about 100 times, so I tend to paint a little fast. That's one thing they don't mention in the Bob Ross videos. How many hundreds of times he's painted each of those paintings that he completes so quickly and easily. Be patient with yourself, go at your own pace, and enjoy the process. Now these last trees are just a little bit set back, so you'll notice that they are a little bit lighter. So I put a lighter green in first, not that much lighter, but just a little more towards the yellow on the value scale I created. And then I put the shadow in instead of the opposite way that I put those first 3 trees in. You don't have to do it that way, it's just kind of an intuitive way I do it, knowing that it's going to be just a little bit easier going with the lighter color in the tree to keep them light, just a little lighter. And if you haven't noticed already, I like to go back and just kind of stamp the tip of the brush. And this is what I'm doing now. Kind of complete that tall, pointy, creepy Italian tree. They're not really creepy. I just refer to Under the Tuscan Sun movie. It's just a funny part of the movie. I love the cypress trees. I love to paint them, and I just love the powerful essence that they have. Usually planted in a row, casting gorgeous shadows and draping shadowy lines. Sometimes they curve along the landscape. It's just very moody. Oh, here I'm painting the green. Here I am, skipping ahead, chatting up. I'm just gonna put in that medium green right in the middle. And I'm painting around where the red flowers are going to go. Don't get too fussy here, because this is going to have several layers. A little bit of medium green, a little bit of dark green, especially towards the bottom where there's going to be more shadow. So think about that. The light's going to be on top, the shadow's going to be in the bottom. I'm using quite a bit of paint, so I'm leaving the brush stroke in some areas. You may or may not be able to see that in this case. But you definitely notice there are light parts and dark parts, leaving a chunky brush stroke here and there. And then just touch up towards the top where you have the light just kind of kissing some of the green parts. This is the blocking in stage, although it's a little bit more than blocking in. So it's going to look a little messy, a little implied, a little chunky. And you're actually shaping your flowers with negative space here. The green being the negative space, and the red is left white for now. Just stamping in there a little bit more concentration where the tree trunks are going to be, and shaping the land. It's okay, you can kind of bounce around and see what you've forgotten. And now we're going to start the mixes for the villa. So we're gonna paint the villa first and get the flowers in there, and then get the ground coverage in there. So we're going to mute this red down by adding green to it. I like to call that, you don't want like a crayon color, even though the villa and the scenes that we generally see when we think of Tuscany are very colorful. You still want these natural lighting, kind of earth-kissed colors. So adding green is a great way to mute that down just a little bit so it doesn't look like it's straight out of the crayon box. So that red is actually the base color to each one of these colors. We'll warm it up with the oranges and yellows. We'll cool it down and muddy it up with the whites and the greens. If you're interested in learning more about color, please visit our Color Mixing 101 course. It talks about the dual primary palette and gives you foundational color mixing skills. here we go. So I've got this yellowish cream color to begin with. I'll just block in the walls of the villa. If you wanted to take that from the tube, that would be raw sienna and white, or raw umber and white with a little bit of burnt sienna. Now the shadow side of the buildings, just adding the darker parts, so that burnt sienna, and use a little extra paint on your brush to get that nice crisp edge, that line down the side of the corner of the building. Everything else is just filling it in. Notice the sides near the trees that might have a shadow casted. Those are the darker sides. There might be reflected light to see that that side courtyard might be reflecting some light back onto the side of the building. Nice. Let's start the roof line now, and that's that nice dark vibrant orange. So it's not orange out of the tube. We mix that with the cool red. Cool red has a little bit of the blue in the base, so it muddies it up just a little bit. If you took it out of the tube, it would be burnt sienna with vermilion orange. And again, notice that I'm following along with the lines of the trace so that I don't lose that sense of having those lines in the roof of the vineyard. Now my lines are a little crooked. I like to have these pieces be a little bit imperfect. But if you want to go through with a ruler and true up your lines after you've gotten your background and your trees in there, sometimes that can really straighten up a piece and you can follow those nice crisp lines. I don't in this sample. Kind of sets the bar for different skill levels and different approaches. This is a more loose approach. Feel free to take your time and get real squared off and tedious with your piece. Most importantly, take a breath. This is supposed to be fun. Looking great so far. All right, let's get these beautiful red flowers in the foreground. Let's start with that. Reddish orange. Notice how red it looks with the green around it. Isn't that amazing? In the color mixing video, in the color mixing course actually, Color Mixing 101, you learn about why this happens, why you see the color as you do comparatively to the color next to it. Something an artist should really know about. Helps you choose your colors. Now this is the blocked in stage of the flowers. You can layer them in, and as I said before, it's fine to bounce around. Sometimes I'll let an area dry and I'll creep up to another part of the painting and then another part of the painting and then circle back around when it's dry. Brush with path color. Let's get the road blocked in as well. We have those colors pre-mixed so they all really are pleasing to the eye. They're all part of each other. All the colors are integrated. And then pick up white. Now I like to use a little bit of warmer, more yellowy mixes and white so that I get different values in the ground coverage, because the eye will read that as different levels of the earth along the pathway. So and this is a wet on wet, just kind of back and forth, darker, lighter, until I find it pleasing.
Just pull your brush through that brown color. Too dark, just take some white while it's still wet, and some white here and there.
So I get pretty thick with this so that I have some coverage and I can play with that wet on wet. Adding a little green in while it's still wet on the sides prevents it from just looking like you just laid down a brown carpet, and kind of integrating the green just a little bit here and there. And then adding some highlights to your ground coverage. Don't get too tedious. Remember, that's not the focus. Just have some fun with it.
And then detail brush. Use any of the brown mixtures from your palette to fill in the house posts. Add water with the detail brush to get a good flow.
Beautiful. This is coming together so nicely. So notice I dipped in with the detail brush just to get the paint that I'm using a little bit more fluid. That's to get some nice crisp lines along the edge. And that's a very thin line, so it's gonna get a better flow if I add a little bit to it. You can also add an acrylic flow medium to that. Here I just like to keep it simple. I don't need it too much, just on the edges here and there.
Now for the windows, grab some more burnt sienna. And the purple mixture.
Beautiful. So let's dip into this dark color that we created. We're gonna really get some contrast going now. So if you're taking it out of the tube, that would be a dark purple, blue and red. Both cool. And the burnt sienna, which if you didn't have the burnt sienna, that's that deep red, orange, and green that will get you close to a burnt sienna. So now we're creating the doors and the windows. Those always pop in these Tuscany scenes. I did water these down just a little bit, so if you're getting those dry edges, just take a little bit of water, not too much, and mix it into the paint so you get a nice crisp edge. If your paint is transparent, you've put too much water in. If you're still getting a jaggedy edge when you're trying to create those nice solid lines for your windows and doors, then you haven't added enough paint to your mix.
Grab any color on your palette. So you've got a nice muddy brush.
So here my paint's drying just a little bit, so I add a little bit of water. And I'm going back to the medium brown, so there's just a little bit of movement within the dark of the door. It looks a little bit flat if you just paint it a solid dark color. So I like to, while it's still wet, add a variation in value using some of the other colors in the building itself.
It literally looks like mud.
These are the lines in the courtyard. It could be a fountain, it could be rows of flowers. So it's really up to you. I'm just making it really simple here. You can get pretty intricate if you want. This is all the detail work. So just creating some line work. And really all I'm doing is following the pencil lines I can still see. So you're actually covering up your pencil lines in the end. This is the beautiful detail work. This is so much fun. I could spend hours on detail work, but I don't in this case. But I highly recommend that you do. It can be very trance-like, very relaxing to just add these little details. And then also knowing when to stop.
Basically, we're just filling in, there's like all these little white specks. And so we're using this to, because it's a whole bunch of colors that are already on our canvas, here and there and everywhere. That's why we use the muddy colors. I did forget the benches. That same dark purple colors for the benches too.
A little bit of water will just get me that nice fine line that I want to get.
Encouraging them to
Now I'm putting the benches in. There's little benches along the
around with the
side of the
details, take their
villa,
time.
just against the wall. It's just a line, horizontal, and 2 short lines down. And then you can take some of that color and just here and there, not across the whole thing, just make some lines at the bottom of the villa where the villa meets, the wall meets the ground. That'll help with some shadow and just kind of ground your, and crisp up the lines and ground your building. And touching up the flowers, giving a little shadow underneath. Generally, it'll be just the petals underneath that may cast a shadow onto the green. Here and there, again, I'm not filling things in. I'm just putting little touches here and there. And now I'm getting a little bit of the shadow underneath the eaves. So if you haven't ever noticed, you can go outside and check out any building or house that has an eave. It'll cast a shadow on the wall underneath where the roof kind of juts out a little bit. And there we go. We've got it.